Hello everyone. I wanted to provide you with a little bit of a history of the cap bills, caps on government spending on the local side, tell you about my role in it, and tell you where we are now as it relates to the new law that you've undoubtedly heard about. That's a 2% flexible statutory cap on local government spending. Goes back 3 years ago. As a mayor, I was very familiar with municipal spending and the system, so took the impetus to be the primary sponsor of a 4% cap. And we worked very hard with superintendents, with other mayors from around the state, to figure out what reasonable exceptions needed to be in there, but nonetheless to make the cap such to encourage less spending. I'm happy to report that although local government spending was at 7.5% before the McKeon bill was in place, after the fact, in the last 2 years, it went from 3.8% and then down to 3.3%. More than we want, but certainly a great improvement from 7. So very recently in this legislative session, knowing what we learned from the last cap bill, we raised the bar even higher to listen to you, the taxpayer, and made it a 2.9% cap. Now the governor came forward, talked about a constitutional amendment and a non-flexible cap, and I won't bore you with all of the reasons why that would have been very hurtful to New Jersey. But the bottom line is, the governor said, I'm happy that we compromise, that you don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and he agreed with us that a statutory cap and a flexible one was most important. So here's what the law is now. Number one, local government spending will be limited to no more than 2% growth. Now, as we know, 4% brought us to 3.3. I'm hopeful that the 2% will get us even lower than that. And we're going to be working all through the summer and into the fall as to other ways to bring systemic reform. Well, let's talk about the flexibility in the cap. Number one, healthcare costs. They're going to rise. It's a nationwide problem, as you know, between 20 to 30% this year. If that wasn't exempted from the cap, we'd lose a third of our teachers, policemen, firemen, and you name it. So that needed to be accepted, and that's what it is. Pension costs, same things. We have to deal with that in the future, but with the League of Municipalities telling us pension contribution is going to rise at a form of 28%, again, 2% just wouldn't have worked, would have resulted in a lot of people losing their jobs. We have to work on pension reform, as we will, through the summer and into the future. The third area was capital expenditures for things that have already been spent, if you will, where you're paying debt service. It makes it impossible to meet if that's already an existing obligation. That's another exemption. The last one has to do with really emergencies. That had been in the old cap bill, maybe in a little bit of a different form, but the bottom line is we knew from history that only 6% of the towns and 4% of the Board of Eds ever went to either the Commissioner of Education or to the local finance board for relief, so it wasn't very much used anyway, and the language will be pretty much the same. So basically what I'm telling you, this has been the cap bill that has been in place for several years now, that has worked, but here's the two differences. A couple of them are real good differences. One has to do with cap banking. Why not, incentivize a town if they spend under 2% or under that number to be able to bank it for years in the future. Otherwise, you incentivize them to spend it. So that's a great change. Another change that the jury's kind of out on is government, or not government, but the voters overriding the 2% cap. You do it by a majority vote, which I agree with. The governor was talking about 60%, majority rules. The thing I worry about is when you look in Massachusetts where they can do overrides, 2/5, the lower demographics of the towns with the smaller, lower demographic, 2/5, the bottom 2/5, they only override 20% of the time. Where the wealthier towns, the upper 2/5 from a demographic perspective, override it like 60% of the time. We got to make sure there's not a bigger schism put in New Jersey as it is. We have a wonderful demographic on paper, but as you know, we don't all live together. So we have to watch that closely as overrides happen to make sure it doesn't create towns of haves and towns of have-nots. That's why flexibility and statutory was so important. Two things the governor wouldn't agree to that we compromised on but have to be dealt with. Bore the heck out of you, but reserve for uncollected taxes. The municipality collects 100% of your tax dollar, even though 60 or 70% goes to either the Board of Ed or the county. If your collection rate, having to do with nobody's fault, goes from, let's say, 99% to 98%, because the good state policy is you have to reserve for the 2% now that you haven't collected, that will, in 1 year, when it changes by just 1%, throw a town way out of cap to begin with. That's something that has to be dealt with. Actually, the tax collectors are state employees that are dealt with, so it's not in the local municipalities' control, and it's because of factors that happen on a government, worldwide basis with the economy that really affects collection rates. So that has to be exempted. The last area is state aid. Not fair. This year with the governor's budget, statewide we lost over $800 million to schools. I think it was close to $200 million to local municipalities. If we get even less aid next year, and I hope that's not the case, but if we do, how can that not be exempted from the cap? That's just not fundamentally fair. Nobody can plan for it. And let me mention two other important points, and then we'll conclude and go on to fight for you, continuing this war, if you will, against property taxes. Number one, if you're an existing municipality playing under our rules of a 4% cap, and you've got employee contracts that are out there for another 2 years, let's say it's a 4-year contract and that number was 3%. Well, if you have 2 more years of 3%, we know in a service business, which is what government is, the biggest cost driver or the biggest expense is salaries, then you're going to be put out of cap, and it's not fair. The sanctity of the contracts under our laws, or country of laws, has to remain. That should be exempted as far as existing contracts. We're working with the governor, and hopefully he sees the wisdom of that. Last has to do with special ed. The one thing that's not in this new law that was in the old law dealt with special ed costs that were extraordinary, meaning over $40,000 a student. Statewide, the average for special ed is about $20,000 a child versus $10,000 a child for mainstream ed. Well, we were talking about exempting out of caps cost over $40,000. Especially a small school district could have a child that moves into town or is born to a family that lives there with extraordinary challenges as appropriately the responsibility is visited on. It could be $100,000 a year. That has to be exempted. Or else we have to talk about a state as to how we're going to deliver those services and maybe make that a responsibility of the entire state, not just by, if you will, the accident of where someone with those challenges just happens to reside at that current time. So those are two important things that we have to work with, and the governor's resolved to do so. So the bottom line is this. We know a 4% cap brought us from 7% down to about 3.3. We're hopeful this 2% cap with the current exemptions as we discussed, nonetheless, will still bring us under that 2%, and if history repeats itself, it will. Last point, a lot of work to do this summer. We have to bring systemic reforms on a lot of things, on mandates that are unfunded, as it relates to the future, as it relates to new municipal employees and just coming on board, as it relates to pension and benefits and what that's going to be like. But we're going to work hard, not only through the summer but into the fall, to bring that systemic reform. We're going to do our best to do it in a bipartisan way. So I want to hear from you. Tell me what you think. I know I went on and on here, and if you're listening to this, you obviously have ideas and you're interested. So please, get in touch with us, Facebook, Twitter, email, you name it. Let us know what you think. I'll get back in touch with you, and we'll work together for a better New Jersey. In the meantime, whoever gets credit for this, it doesn't matter, because the biggest, most important thing is the winner is the New Jersey taxpayer. Take care. Look forward to working with you.